Well, first of all, in following up on what Daniel was doing on his presentation, I would like to announce the first Russia Hotel Investment Summit. No, I'm kidding. Okay. We'll all be there, won't we? This is an opportunity to hear from, or actually to make me feel older, because we're going to introduce 3 young leaders. I'm going to ask them to come to the stage and introduce them. Sereina Colgan, who is the Senior Manager of Affiliations for Marriott. Plunien, the Vice President of Cedar Capital Partners. Here. And Kimberly Yoong, who's the Assistant Vice President of Aareal Bank. So what we have here on the stage is we have managers, investors, and owners. And so I would just like to start with Sereina, because in listening to the last presentation from Philippe, I've always felt that you can't justify your brand until you can define your brand. You can't justify your rates until you can define your brand. With 55 brands, I think that's the number I heard on Accor. How many brands does Marriott have?
We have 32.
Okay.
And we're, I think, very selective with adding new brands. We know that we have very good brands, very well-defined brands. And if there's a need for it, obviously we'll expand, but we want to make sure that we get them right in the first place and then go on.
Well, not to put you on the spot, but I was at a conference recently in which I asked somebody if they could tell me how many brands Marriott had. And one person was able to raise their hand. This was an industry conference. And I said, and who do you work for? Marriott. Great, okay, I got that. But then I asked them to define the brands, and then we had a problem. With 55 brands at Accor, this goes back to what Daniel was saying, you know, if you can define a luxury brand, you can justify the rate. You can define a low-end brand, you can justify the rate. What's going on with the middle? What's going on from an investment point of view, from a management point of view, from an ownership point of view of the middle, which seems to be getting squeezed? Where's the emotional connection for guests in this fast-changing world of people combining leisure and business? What happens to the middle?
I think talking about the middle, it's actually a good point, because one of our fastest growing brands is the soft brands. They are not in the luxury, they're not in the economy segment, they're in the upscale to premium segment. And they are our fastest growing brand, and that says a lot. So there is resonance in the market for them to grow.
Do you agree with that in terms of your investment, in terms of your choices?
Well, for us on the lending side, we actually lend throughout the whole range. We typically had been focusing a bit more on the full service and city hotels, and as we saw during COVID, it was good to have that diversity. So, you know, it's not necessarily focusing on like the mid-service or the full service, but you know, the whole range of it. So.
I was recently staying at a hotel in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was a Residence Inn by Marriott, there you go. But my impression of that hotel, it changed the way I looked at things. It was no longer a question of could I stay here or did I like staying here. It was could I live here, right? Could I work here? And the answer for me was yes, I could. It changed the way we talked about extended stay. I mean, that hotel was definitely equipped for that. But I hadn't stayed in one in a long time, and they had done their homework in terms of their design. They realized that, you know, people don't change their lifestyle when they change their location. They really want to be able to do what they do at home in that room, especially if they're working remotely. So in terms of investment, again, in terms of design, in terms of what you're doing in developing hotels, that's coming into play.
For sure, and also the mix of it, right? Because there's so many people that stay for a longer period for many different reasons. We're not only talking about consultants that are on an assignment, we're talking about families. If you have a young child, you want to warm up that milk in the evening, you're happy to stay at an extended stay property just for that convenience of having the space, accommodate the entire family in a room, and then not having a hassle of running around. So we're seeing a big mix of customers wanting similar products.
Now, Ina, in terms of owning hotels, what changes are you implementing now as you begin to put that money in and put that management expertise in based on what Serena's saying.
Do you mean in terms of design choices and brand
Yeah,
choices
yeah,
that
yeah.
we put in there?
Yeah.
I think so. There's a lot that resonates here in terms of how we look at spaces and how spaces are designed. So our portfolio actually has quite a large share of what we would commonly consider lifestyle hotels. And here in particular, not only kind of what brand dictates in terms of how they want look and feel, but also the choices of the design teams that come with it to make sure that the customer segments that are being addressed raise in importance of how we look at hotel design in the initial stages. So yeah, absolutely.
I've always believed, and please don't get angry at me, that people who design hotels have never stayed in one. Anybody want to second that? Thank you, sir. What I mean by that is, the design team comes in and goes, oh, we want to give them mood lighting. They puts me in a bad mood, because I can't see, right? The bathrooms. People spend more waking hours in their bathroom than they spend in any other room in the hotel. And I'm especially appealing to the women here who need light in that bathroom.
I think you might have, some designers and hotel brands might feel somewhat offended.
That's okay, I'm here to offend when they're wrong.
No, but I think this is where the need for sort of form or function what leads. And I think it needs to be a balance, particularly when you try to create, well, a design experience, an interior experience for people. These two things need balance, and a lot of the times that comes by upfront discussions between people at Marriott, at Accor, at Hilton that formulate brand standards and what's needed in the various spaces that they occupy, and the design teams that we appoint who are responsible for setting a scene, for setting a mood, and us as owners and our lenders on how we find the sweet spot on the cost for all of that.
Exactly, so, oh, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
And actually, just what I wanted to say, it's also, obviously we create brand standards, but in the end, we're only as good as our franchisees who operate the hotels. And it's a continuous discussion. And I think that's why it's important that we have and we listen continuously of what's been working, what we could change. And I think Moxie is a great example of that. Moxie was as a concept that we have all the public areas on one floor, and the bar is in the middle. Now, Moxie was a new build brand, and on a rendering that works perfectly. But the Moxie in Warsaw, for example, is built in an old vodka distillery. That doesn't work. So all of a sudden, public spaces had to be remodeled on different levels to accommodate for the existing building while still operationally working. And that's a conversation. And I think in hospitality, we are people. We are here for the people, and we work together to create that perfect product together with our franchisees, our owners, and partners.
I mean, there's a certain ironic production, I should say, or byproduct from COVID, because we had social distancing. Everybody needed to breathe. Everybody needed more space. Now space is a big commodity. It's a big premium, if you will, in a hotel room when you're going to have a change in lifestyle with people working from their room.
That one for me?
Yeah, I am.
It's interesting that you raise it, because by tendency I would actually say that the way we look at hotel spaces, the room allocation and portion decreases bit by bit. So the amount of hotels that we're now seeing, looking at, that have actually more limited spaces that focus on good sleeping, good bathroom experience, and trying to find spaces and push people into the public realm of the buildings to live and spend and eat there, is actually what we're seeing more and more when we're looking at hotel buildings, when we're looking at how to redesign those buildings and how to redevelop them. So when we think about space, actually it becomes more and more about how do we organize public spaces and how people move within them, as much as how can we maximize hotel room sizes.
Now, of course, we're talking with three young leaders here, so I have to bring up age. Are you seeing median age coming down? Are you seeing longer stays? Are you seeing, in the old days, every hotel would say they had a gym, but nobody used it. Everybody said they would only stay at a hotel if they had a swimming pool and a gym, and the utilization was like 8%. What is it now? What are the changes now?
I think it's hard to put that into numbers because it really depends on the market. But I would say that that mix of business, and I hate the word, but it describes it as pleasure.
I hate that word, by the way.
I hate it, but it is a good way of explaining what is happening at the moment of people staying longer. We had the discussion before about Thursday being the traffic jam day, now not Friday. And I do think that therefore the needs change. And therefore people also pick hotels maybe with different facilities, more space, and more flexibility for their needs that might change not only for different trips, but throughout the trip.
Now, Kimberly, I go back to the days of COVID where, and I'm probably low on these numbers, at least in the United States, we had over 1,000 hotels that were in essentially a technical state of default, but none of the bankers wanted to foreclose because the bankers didn't want them either. What's changed in terms of the resiliency now as we see the economy soaring back in the hotel sector?
Well, I think maybe I'll start off by saying that throughout COVID, at least for our bank, we had 0 non-performing loans. We didn't default on any of our borrowers. I think it does show the resilience already before COVID, that, you know, the hotels are a very strong asset class, and that ability to bounce back, and us as a bank, that willingness, or rather that belief in hotels, that this is just a temporary thing. And we have now sort of coming out of COVID, if you can say that we're coming out of it, because it supposedly still exists, but we already see that hotels have bounced back much quicker than we already expected them to, and at least in terms of the bank as well, like hotels are actually our best performing asset class, and so we've lended heavily in hotels before COVID, and we will continue to lend in hotels.
Well, considering the numbers I gave you, having 0 non-performing loans is amazing.
Yeah, I would say so. I think also coming out of the great financial crisis, obviously I was not working at the time, but that I think banks have learned to, you know, sort of be more reasonably leveraged. And so when we went into COVID, we were fairly reasonably leveraged, and we were always very big on having strong sponsors who understood hotels, because for us, we say that we're hoteliers first and bankers second. So we wanted to make sure that we were speaking the same language with our clients. And so when COVID hit, we knew that we were, you know, we were on eye level with each other. And so coming out of, or going through the crisis together wasn't actually, it was a challenge, but it wasn't actually that much of a challenge because we understood each other.
Now, we heard in the previous presentation with interest rates going up, how much is that affecting your decision making in terms of numbers?
A lot. Naturally, especially compared to even, let's say, 24 months ago when interest rates were in the negative, you know, we looked very heavily on yield on debt, because, you know, the debt service coverage ratios were in the, you know, 300-400%, and it didn't matter. Interest rates didn't matter, and now suddenly, you know, a few months later, and you are in a completely different scenario. So we have, let's say, long conversations with potential borrowers and existing borrowers as well, as to what are, you know, do we need to look at into, you know, different hedging requirements? How can we find a compromise, and as Ina said earlier, you know, how can we make things work for both sides? Because, you know, for on the owner side and on the brand side who work together, that, you know, the numbers still need to make sense for both sides. So we're just trying to see how we can find that sweet spot.
And I think what COVID has also shown, we're in this together. If it's not going well in the hotels, it's not going well for anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
it's the only thing that stays is the relationship and the quality of the partnership.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, during this period of time, at least in the last year and a half, we've seen, at least in most markets, hotel rates at near historic highs, and not seasonally affected. I mean, I'm seeing rates in October and November that usually were soft months, still very, very high. The question, of course, that everybody has in this room is, are those sustainable?
That is a question we ask ourselves as well. We have seen, let's say, I don't want to call it stagnating, but we have seen sort of like a slowdown in terms of rate growth naturally, because we have been coming out of that recovery. But that's why we do look at our portfolio very closely, and we make sure that we structure in together with, you know, with our borrowers, reasonable covenants to make sure that that even going forward, we will still be on both sides on a comfortable level.
So what are you telling your borrowers now that you didn't tell them 3 years ago?
Good question.
Well, maybe I can jump in here as one of Aareal's borrowers. I think what we're generally seeing, and which is very understandable, is that in times when everything's going well, there's kind of just base trust, and we're happy that things are rolling. Now that we're entering into periods where things aren't maybe as straightforward at all times, there's a stronger need, I think, to be more informed on short-term basis. So we have loads more conversations kind of month on month about initiatives that we're doing, about specific data points that are to be provided, just to ensure that there's comfort all around the table about what we're doing and how we're dealing with it. I think that's something that we are seeing at the moment across some of our lenders, kind of that need and want to just stay a bit more informed and on top of what's happening and how decisions are being made and driven and how the business is being run.
Before the pandemic, if you went and looked at Marriott, and I'll get to Hilton in a second, Marriott was opening up like one hotel every 17 hours. It was like hard to even get your arms around that. Hilton was doing like one hotel every 24 hours. And if you take a look at the numbers today, at least with those two hotels, they're almost at that same pace. And then the question becomes, is that sustainable? But then you have to go back to human behavior and the changes that were made, maybe not even consciously, by travelers and by your guests. COVID, whether they liked it or not, brought everybody up close and personal with their own sense of mortality. And either they got COVID and survived, or friends of theirs got it and didn't, or family members didn't. And all of a sudden they made a change in their purchasing patterns, right? They didn't want to buy luxury goods anymore. They didn't want to buy new cars or clothing or jewelry or expensive electronic items, but they did want to buy experiences. There was a sort of a Last Supper mentality about their travel choices, that if we don't go now, we're never going to go, and we're going, and price is not an option. Is that really explaining the same numbers now in actual hotel development?
I think for people, it's not only the revenge travel or people going back to that.
By the way, I hate that word just as much as bleisure. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's more sustainable than that. Loneliness is on the rise, and I think COVID has made that problem even more severe. In 2017 in the US, people spent more time on their screen than with friends, and that's the time when it surpassed. Now it's way more time in front of the screen than with friends. And I think that need to reconnect, you can only really do it when you experience something with your friends. And it's become a commodity. It's become something that people want to pay for, spend time for. And that's why also hotels are the place to do it.
But there's also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that just a second, that I don't necessarily think that we're looking at kind of changing travel behaviors and the connection with COVID here as a cause of, but more an accelerator of trends that we've been seeing from 2016, 17, 18, and the choices people make and how that's been accelerated over the period from 2020 to now, and not as a cause of.
Well, here's a finance question for all of you, and that is, during COVID, I got to go back to it because we saw some radical changes. People were able to save a lot of money, and when they came back out, and I hate to say the word revenge travel, when they came back out, price was not necessarily an issue for them. They just wanted to go. They weren't price sensitive. They were going to spend as much money as they could because they wanted to have that experience. And they blew through a lot of money. But during the same period of time, they were getting solicited by so many different credit card offers with mileage bonuses and perks that they're putting it all on their credit cards. And we're looking at consumer credit card debt right now, at least in the United States, of $1.3 trillion. Right? That's unsecured credit. Does that worry you at all?
I think you're looking at three blank faces here. I'm not sure that we've seen issues with that in any of our hotels or kind of from a travel perspective. I don't know how it looks with you ladies, but no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think also because there's a shift, right? I mean, okay, that is on the rise for young people. There's a shift also of what is important to them. You spend money on what's important to you.
So where are they spending the money? Within the hotel. Has that changed?
Within the hotel, I think just more on the experience, on traveling, on meeting people, and not maybe so much on goods.
Well, I agree. I think it's well, even with I think the increase in costs and expenses to to travel, to airline tickets are so expensive, hotels are so expensive, and I think as we both said that people are willing to spend money now for experiences. So I don't think that we've actually encountered, or at least maybe we're not so granular into looking at each consumer spending, but at least on a business perspective. But I don't think we've seen issues with that so far. So,
And maybe it's also not that travel becomes differently. We know that all-inclusive is a big segment actually for the younger generation. It used to be that all-inclusive was something that was, for all the people that just didn't want to leave the hotel, but now all-inclusive has to offer that experience while at the same time being able to knowing exactly already 6 months before you travel, this is how much my holiday is going to cost.
And that gets back down to design of hotels, right? In terms of what are you going to offer them in terms of an experience within the confine of the footprint that you have.
No, absolutely, and especially as I think, from a where do we invest and what segments are interesting, I think there's been a lot of talk around investment in leisure resorts, coastal destinations, and where particularly that discussion around how do we concept resorts, how do we price and present that to consumers ultimately becomes more and more important for people who are active in the region. Yeah.
And has it changed your approach to seasonality? Because we talk about ski resorts now making most of their money in the summer. I mean, what's changed there?
I think we're hearing more and more conversation about, well, no, let's scrap. I think there's been always talk about how can we optimize the period during which we operate resort hotels, how can we make most use of shoulder seasons. I think that's just more concretized in a lot of regions where we're now having more specific discussions with island airports, for example. How can we, as a hospitality industry, including airlines and hotels, ensure that there's airlines from key destinations operating to the island so that we can then optimize on performance during shoulder and off months season. So I think there's been a stronger move to concretize discussions around how season shifts and how we can all benefit from that.
Well, now you've given me the elephant in the room, and that's airlift. Because, it's one thing to say we're all in this together until the airlines decide to go their own way. And without airlift, a lot of your destination hotels, a lot of your hotels in general are basically challenged. We're seeing that around the world now. Every airplane may be full, but where are they going, and what's the actual lift to where you need them?
I mean, that's very heavily dependent on the kind of micro locations that you look at. I think generally I would tend to think that there's more airlift to smaller destinations, or at least connecting availability to smaller destinations. I'm not sure we've necessarily seen a sort of density to just key destinations in the country.
But I think also the constraint of demand is it also shows itself in the hotel, like how hotel rates have increased. Because I mean, like the fact that hotels are charging higher amounts and people are still traveling, and it also shows when air travel actually comes back to its full capacity, or maybe it doesn't. We found a way to balance ourselves out, that maybe we charge higher rates and have lower occupancy. Or do we actually still want to go back to our previous or former days of having more people but charging lower rates? So I think we've just found that balance, at least for now, that we are just looking at higher rates because of constrained demand, and people are still paying that rates.
It may change the model only because airlift is not determined by the old movie Field of Dreams. If we build it, they will come, because in many cases the airlines are all about yield. And so, using the Caribbean as an example, a lot of airlines now have basically transformed into being extortionists. They're basically saying, if you want us to continue to service to the island of St. Lucia, you have to pay us $5 million to show up with the one flight a week we got already. And all of a sudden you have an island there that has no other choice. They pay that money, and they're still only getting one flight. So how do you fill the rooms?
But then the question is, would you rather have 10 well-paying customers or 100 customers who don't pay as much. If you reach your same bottom line, you know, maybe this is our solution to over-tourism. Could be. But
Well, a crazy way to get there, right? But the
Great.
numbers also determine what experiences you can offer.
Well, you could also offer more bespoke experiences. You know, I think people are adaptable. I think what we've seen throughout COVID is that hotels, the tourism industry has been adaptable to, you know, the changing needs and changing desires of consumers. So, you know, people are desiring more, you know, personable experiences and people who offer tourism experience are adapting to that. You know, they're offering more expensive but more bespoke experiences. So I think we're just sort of balancing or finding that what consumers actually want.
I mean, in a world of siloing, which we all are in right now, to what extent are you guys actually reaching out to airlines to talk with them as partners to make sure you're going to get that flow that's going to fill your rooms?
I'm happy to take this one. So I think that does happen, and that happens for destinations that have more traditionally very confined season borders and have no other way of getting there during the off season. So I think a lot of Greek islands, for example, are a good example for us, where I know that both the local hotel teams as well as us on a kind of more strategic level do speak to airlines, to tourism boards, to find ways to work together as an industry to ensure accessibility longer seasons and optimizing that. So that does happen, yeah.
For each of you, what have you done to change your business model in the last 3 years that you never thought you were going to do, but now you've been forced to do because of changing either traveler patterns, interest rates, loan provisions, or just the general political nature of where you happen to be operating?
And I'm not sure that's really change of business model, but I think the one thing we've all had to do that I never expected to have to do is shut hotels for durations as long as 13, 14 months during the course of COVID, and that was probably one of the toughest thing I've ever had to see done over the course of my career. So that's not necessarily a change, maybe, but that's certainly something I'd never think I'd see done across the industry.
Sereina?
I would agree, probably closing entire portfolios of hotels. It's something that has impacted through COVID, but I think also what has changed and what is on the rise now is through COVID, the need also to affiliate with the bigger brands, because we've come out strong. And even big groups, like we just announced a couple of months ago, the MGM deal, 17 hotels, 40,000 rooms joining the Marriott Bonvoy system. There has been more appreciation for what a big home can provide also to other big homes. And that has definitely changed.
Kimberly?
I think actually it's a similar situation where I think at its peak we had about 87% of our 11 billion euro portfolio closed. And so now when someone hits us with, how is interest rates going to change? How is a war going to change? And how are high utility bills going to change your portfolio and your business plan going forward and your belief in hotels? I think we always say, like, well, look, we dealt with a far large majority of our portfolio being closed, generating zero income, and we managed to get through it without any technical defaults, and so, you know, hit us with it. So we still like hotels, and we still believe in hotels, and we'll continue to do that.
And then, of course, there's the other issue that has not left anybody in this room: staffing. You know, it's one thing to talk about how many hotels you're building. You still need people there who want to work, who want to do their job, who love their job, who you can hire, who you can afford to actually staff the hotel. What's happening in that?
So I think we see that a lot more of our brands are actually looking for staff outside of the hospitality industry, because a lot of people have left throughout COVID. So a good example is actually Edition Hotels. Edition, when it opens in a new city, they go for a hunting night. And it's basically the team going to places like art galleries, bars, restaurants, meeting new people and saying, hey, Do you want to work in hospitality? Would it be something for you? And meeting eclectic people that can also then translate the experience to our guests.
Ina?
Yeah, I think Daniel mentioned war for talent earlier, and I do think that's a fair thing that to say that we're facing the very same issue in hospitality, particularly for a lot of line functions, where I think base salaries are always a big discussion, and I think maybe from an investment perspective, maybe controversial thing to say, but kind of making sure that we're aligning those base salaries for line staff with kind of living standards in the countries. That's one positive outcome we've seen, that there's been an industry shift to making that happen, and can be supported on the bottom line by top line and extra revenues coming through.
And higher rates.
Correct.
Kimberly?
And I think, well, on the lending side, we're not that much into the details of, do we have enough staff and all of that. But we do, of course, hear these anecdotally from our borrowers that, staffing is an issue, or, the reason why performance is not coming up is because, staffing is an issue, or utilities are an issue, etc. But I think throughout COVID, people have found a way, operators have found a way to sort of circumvent that, not entirely, but, to find solutions in terms of increasing operational efficiency, as Ina was trying to say. And and higher rates, of course. So I think we have we find solutions to that.
Of course, you have increased efficiency, maybe on a bottom line basis, but do you have increased service? And that's the real issue. I mean, I was at a hotel recently, and by the way, it was at that Residence Inn in Grand Rapids, where there was a sign at the front desk saying, housekeeping will be provided once every 4 days. What's the average stay at a Residence Inn? It's about 2.5. So a lot of people are going, wait a minute, I paid for this, where is the housekeeping, right? Are you seeing that? We're seeing it industry-wide. So that's also part of your staffing challenge. How do you provide the experience if you don't have enough people there to deliver it?
Probably also a question of much used word, ESG. Doing less room service or doing less cleaning to the rooms means less water consumption, means less laundry consumption, means less replacement on amenities. So I think that is not necessarily a factor that's only driven by staffing issues, but also what I like to think are conscious choices around environmental issues.
But how do you communicate that to your guests who have come to expect it, though?
Actually, we have some hotels that are trying to incentivize our guests by, for example, giving extra Bonvoy points if they decide not to get their room cleaned on that day. And then
that's sort of a reverse incentive.
Exactly, and it's for them to decide, do I want those extra points? Do I want to have a drink of that at the bar? Do I want to save that up for a stay with my family later on? Is their choice. And I think if you give that power to the guests, a lot of them will take it.
But
The choice of going without to get more later.
Just one little point to sort of wrap that up, because I know our time's up, but I think it also depends on how do you define experience, because, as we've been talking about, the consumer expectations have changed and all of that. I mean, who decided that in every hotel you need to change your sheets every single night? This is something that we're used to it because it's always been this way, but who says that you need it? Maybe going forward, what maybe I want is, a little amenity by my bedside every night instead of just having my sheets changed. Maybe it's just about a way of redefining the way people travel and redefine the way people perceive luxury, or comfort and personalization of services.
So don't change the sheets, but don't charge me $9 for the bottle of water.
Yeah, maybe that.
Are you agreeing to that?
I agree to that. I would rather, I don't need to. I don't change my sheets every night when I'm at home. So when I travel, why do I need that? I would rather have different experiences. I'd rather, we redefine what a hotel experience is, rather than say, okay, we're not meeting service standards of the past, because maybe we just need to redefine what the hotel experience is.
Sereina, Ina, and Kimberly, please thank our panel.